and it could be that someone
Got
comes
it.
in later. So welcome, guys.
Do we have a
few.
waiting room?
No, we do not.
Okay.
I
That's
don't
good,
ever
because we don't have
put,
to-
I don't ever put a waiting room because it's tricky. You can forget about it. So I don't know if you ladies would like to start, even though it's only us, or shall we wait a few more minutes to see if the other RSVPs are coming?
I don't know. What do you think? I mean, you can wait 5 minutes, I guess, and see if anybody else shows up, and then we can.
Okay, Karen, do you know who was on that list?
Sure.
Was someone from Israel?
No, I think that was an old meeting.
Someone
on
from
just a sec.
Finland?
Finland, yeah, Dana Freeling from Finland had signed up. And I just, I'm like going down through 200 pieces of file tree.
I did repost the links on all 3 pages at 6:15, the live link.
We didn't get a second reminder of this, did we, today?
I didn't see one in my mailbox.
Nope, neither did I. And that was supposedly automatic.
And in the past, we have.
Yeah. So
But
Karen, do
I'll
you
tell
want
you-
to make a note to send them a notification to IT that we didn't have that come through? Maybe something failed in their system. They actually put it through, but it didn't happen, just so that we can back it up for the next time.
Yeah. Okay, so besides us, Dana, Christina Roja, I think is local, but I'm not
Yes,
sure.
she
Judy
teaches at
Blish.
ACS. Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and Judy Blish. So besides us, that's who?
Do you want me to messenger? I'm friends with Christina on Facebook. Do you want me to messenger
Sure, why
her
not?
and just see?
Yeah.
Let me open Messenger.
It won't look too desperate. I mean, my other concern that I keep, banging Stacy and Sarah Jane both about is that we don't get men out to these events. Partly that's advertising, but it also, there's Judy. Judy's in. It may have to do with the subject matter. Hi, Judy. We're kind of waiting to start for a couple of other people. But I mean, what do you think about that? What are some other things we should be talking about? I definitely think the Social Security information is something that we might want to talk about more locally. Like, how do you go about it? Because that seniors caucus on Friday, Janet, is not going to have how-to information. That's if they don't come up with that. It's something we probably should be doing locally.
Yeah, everybody's situation is unique. That's part of the problem. And everybody that I know who had a lawyer, help them negotiate the totalization of Social Security and ICA. Everybody's situation was different. And it makes it hard to prepare any kind of a how-to thing, except, find a lawyer that you trust and let them walk you through, let them help you with it.
On that, I think we're okay with the Social Security end of it if we have an expert from the embassy.
There's not there.
What?
We don't have a Social Security department at the embassy anymore.
That doesn't mean we can't get somebody on Zoom to tell us from the Social Security
that's
Administration
possible.
beyond what happens with the Greek system, because that is so notoriously complicated that even the person with all of the right and schemata and so forth still needs an attorney to go ahead and file. We could do a presentation that, okay, once you've got your ICA in order, or before you get your ICA in order, this is what you need to have done with Social Security Administration. And that, certainly would prove as a public service, since we have so many members who are over the age of 50, I think that would be beneficial. even if it's, for somewhere down the road. It's not going to change that much with the US. Greece, like I said, they're notorious for being complicated, but it's something to think about, for later stage of the game.
Well, it seems as though there's at least 2 tracks, maybe 3. There's the person who's been an employee and an employee under both systems or under one or the other. There's the person who's like a lot of the English teachers who have business books, but they're very simplified business books. And then there's the people who actually own businesses and have a much more complex, or there might be some other things where they have a more complex tax and retirement issue that would be taken into consideration. But if we looked at those and see what those tracks are, and as you say, Stacy, like where do they converge, or at what point do they diverge? We're all in the same boat up to a certain point, and then we need to get the lawyer.
Branch out for the Greek element, yeah.
Yeah.
Jane,
Is anybody?
Shall we begin? Yeah.
Yeah,
Don't
okay,
wait.
so I've just sent the link. And Christina Roja responded that she has parent-teacher conferences. I told her we would be here until 8:30, and I gave her the link.
Okay.
So it sounds
And I
like
sent
there
you an
was.
email earlier that Kristen also said she's going to try to pop in if she can get her 6th graders under
Okay.
control and back in the box.
I'm right
All
now,
right.
I think.
Hi, Judy.
Yeah.
Nice to see you with us. So I guess I don't feel like I need to go through the Kafeneion spiel about what it is and why we're here, because we all know, and we all know Stacy, our chair. So I think we should cut to Janet and Lee. Well, first of all, Janet, and Lee, do you know everyone on this call? Do you know Judy?
Yes,
Trish?
from a previous meeting, yeah.
Okay,
But
Great.
she's muted, huh? So, yeah.
great. Thank you.
Hi,
There you are.
Judy.
Ooh, I love
Hi.
the screen.
So I think we'll let Janet and Lee take it from here. And are you guys ready for me to put the PPT up on the screen, or?
Let's
Either
just
way.
start with that real quickly, because I think it's an opportunity to refresh everybody's memory, and it might prompt some comments that will help get us started.
Let me put it up just a moment.
Before you guys get started, just for anybody that might be watching live on Facebook, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got interested in this subject and researching, both Janet and Lee?
Okay. Well, I got interested in doing research on educational policy through Democrats Abroad Greece, but made my career in education. There's an old sort of joke among educators that everybody who went to school thinks they're an expert in education. And that certainly, I mean, being in education as a career didn't prepare me at all for the kind of learning curve that I was going to experience as I did the research to prepare the PowerPoint slides and to participate in this event. So yeah, it was kind of a continuation of my education. Yeah, that said. Lee?
Yeah, I guess I was coming at the Kafeneion from the point of view that I think I may have mentioned this to some of you, I'm very concerned about what's going on in the United States right now. And I wanted to learn more about different aspects of the political situation and what's going on, and what perhaps some things I could do, or learn enough about situations where maybe I could make or have some influence on something. And education is one that I have some particular interest in, from the point of view that, we all participate in education. Education has always been very important to me, especially related to my kids. And I think that actually that thought was something that played out when I was reading some of these articles. And then I was a librarian at ACS for a number of years. So I got to see a little bit of the inside of what education is like and the challenges of it. So those were sort of the things that drew me to it.
Thanks. I wanted to make the point that neither one of you started out as political activists, and yet, you know, the spark has been lit. So great.
Yeah, we're really lucky that you guys stepped up. I'm gonna start this now. This is the PPT, which was prepared. Whoops, here we go. Can all of you see this?
No.
It'll start in a minute. It takes a while.
Says that started screen sharing. Oh, there it goes.
Here we go. Okay. So we began from the place of, and I was discussing this with Lee and with Sarah Jane before, of place of curiosity about how we could better understand the conservative and liberal policy agendas in education, apart from all of the things that are in the media about ways in which, for example, Republicans and Democrats are divided. And so we thought looking at what the purpose of public education in the US is to begin with would be a good place to start. And so we can maybe talk later on about how this purpose has maybe changed in the very recent times as people have more choice about schools to send their kids, even in the the realm of public schools. But I'm wondering if, you know, people of all political, across the political spectrum agree on the purpose of public education anymore. So I don't know, do we want to comment on these as we go through them, or should we just go through them as, you know, because I would like to hear voices, other people's voices about this. Or do you want to just go through the slides and then talk about the things that we read and are bringing to the table?
Well, why don't we
Anybody have-
read the first slide and then see if we have any comments?
Okay.
Would you like me to read the slide or would you like to read it?
Do you want me to read it to you? Okay.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to read it. I just didn't know. Okay. In the US, children attend school from around the age of 5 until graduation at the age of 18. During these years, they're expected to transition from illiterate children to masters of the skills and knowledge needed for their futures as productive members of society. Public schools educate most children during this critical time in their lives. According to the National School Boards Association, public education exists to serve the following purposes, among others. Prepare students for college and the workforce, including preparing them for jobs that may not even exist yet due to rapidly changing technology. Help children fulfill their diverse potentials. Enable students to become well-rounded individuals, focusing on the whole child and not just mastery of academic content. Prepare students to live productive lives and become good citizens while obeying the social norms and laws of society. Master Common Core and state standards, sit for school-based and standardized assessments, participate in activities and sports. Develop many literacies such as numerical, technological, and visual literacies.
You know, Jan, I look at that and I say to myself, that last comment is sort of what we have, I think, thought of as education for too many years.
Mastery,
And
yeah.
it's interesting to think about, you know, these other I mean, maybe the first one too. I mean, everybody's very focused on what they're going to be doing after they graduate from high school. But the other ones really get lost in, I don't know, translation. And it'll be interesting to see, you know, whether or not those things can begin to come forward a little bit. Although I have to say that based on some of my reading, it's clearly going to be a challenge.
Can I say
I'm
something?
looking at those three things in the middle, and I'm thinking, you know, that's what we were talking about education when we talked about education 10, 20 years ago, that we were too centered on academics and we were too centered on, you know, who gets A's and who gets B's. And we want to help all of these kids develop their diverse potentials and then, you know, become well-rounded individuals, sports, dance, and engineering. Okay. And then there's a backlash to that too, where you don't, you know, it's not merit-based anymore. You can, you know, anybody can be a brain surgeon as long as he's fulfilling his potential. You know, anybody can get up on the internet and be an expert that everybody, you know, and give disinformation that everybody follows because we're all fulfilling our potential and being the best that we can be. So what these things mean to educators and people working with kids to help them develop and what they mean in the larger society sometimes are two different things. And there's a little bit of lip curling going on about all this soft crap, like get in there and get them ready to have a job because, you know, it's jobs and money and economics.
Hmm.
And it also makes me wonder about why people are opting out of public education. You know, maybe these are not shared purposes as they maybe used to be, that people are looking for more options. And part of it is because I believe that now in the US, people have a lot more choice as far as even the public education, and they shop around for public schools the way affluent families used to shop around for private schools.
Yeah.
And that's had a consequence of widening the gap between the so-called good schools and bad schools. When I went to school, I went to the public school, and there was no discussion about whether it was a good school or a bad school. It was a public school, like all the other public schools in Ohio or Michigan, where I lived at the time. But then there was that time when public schools started to be put on lists that they were good schools or bad schools. And that translated into other things that had to do with the racial profiles of the families that sent their kids to those schools. The bad
financial
schools,
profiles
i.e.
too.
Excuse me?
I think, and financial profiles too.
Sure, socioeconomic
Yeah.
class.
The upper
and so-
income schools with the advanced programs for kids. Excuse me, but I went back to Ohio State in like 1980 to
Mhm.
complete what I had not done when I dropped out. And there were all these kids in a math class that had gone to something up in Shaker Heights in Cleveland. You know, they were in some kind of advanced program, and I'm still sitting there going, A plus B equals, you know, whatever. And they were poof, gone. So that was also happening where parents were demanding in the public schools, demanding advanced programming or, you know, honors program, honors math.
So maybe there isn't the kind of total buy-in to all of these purposes of education that there used to be. And maybe, you know, we should leave this here for now and go on, you know, to the next slide and see whether the values of and the pillars underlying the different conservative and liberal agendas may impact why that's so.
I mean, I'm wondering how this compares to like a country like Switzerland, which has a very rigorous academic program from the age, you know, well, you have to pass tests at the age of 12 that will indicate whether you go to high school or to a technical high school, which prepares you for already to enter the workforce as opposed to higher
UK does that
education.
too.
I wonder what theirs is highly developed, I would say their system is. And I just wonder if they have a similar sort of purpose in their education. It would be really interesting to look up. I'd have to translate it from the French or the Italian, but I mean, just
One
curious.
thing that it would be true of Switzerland, I think, is that you have a more uniform population.
Much more
And
homogeneous.
Yeah, homogeneous, yeah.
homogeneous population, yeah. And so that might make it a little easier to institute some of these things.
Right. Well, they are much more narrow-minded. You know, if the hole is round, you must fit into the hole is round. There is no kind of no child left behind policy, but like in the States. Anyway, okay.
You must not work on the Sabbath, don't forget. Your neighbors will call the cops on you if you move a rock in your garden on the Sabbath.
Would you like to discuss
have new
Chinese
laws in Ohio.
education? Does anybody know
Chinese.
anything about it? Yeah, I mean, if you think that the Swiss education is very tidy, try the Chinese.
Mm.
They're absolutely relentless. The children go to school for 20 hours a day. They
I
just-
can imagine.
It's
Or in
a slight
Japan.
exaggeration, but not much. They
Yeah.
don't have any time off at all. It's a morning to morning, continuous study. So they end up with a very homogeneous population. Like, it's all, everybody's learned the same things.
So
Well, it's interesting because it's very achievement oriented,
Yes.
no, as is the US education supposedly.
Japan,
If the public education is in the hands of local authorities, of course it's going to be all mixed up.
Mm. Yeah, I'm thinking about what, Horace Mann said about American public education is unique because it's American and it's public. And, Horace Mann said that in order for America and democracy to survive, there has to be public education. So from the get-go, the purpose was to fit into particular goals that were defined according to American society. And he called it the great equalizer. It was supposed to be a force that would, make everybody equal, not make everybody the same, but, have equality and equity, built into it. And so, I think that, every country's public education system is tailored somewhat, according to the reasons why it was created, the kind of population that it's supposed to serve, what kinds of outcomes, they're hoping for. And also, to what degree do they pay attention to things like the well-being of the individual as opposed to just, test scores or academic achievement, that kind of thing.
I also think that the basic education that we're talking about in terms of equity in all local communities, because for the most part, it's not nation-based, but local-based in terms of setting up their curriculum and cueing to their communities. It is about equity. Let's make sure that this group of people has this set of particular items of knowledge. It may go beyond that in terms of vocational training as you get in upper grades to make sure that they can go out and get a job, even if it's only a minimum wage job. One of the things that I've seen change across US education as a former educator in a couple of high schools and junior colleges 40 years ago was the fact that there was such a push, not just toward content in terms of absorbing information, but critical thinking. I was teaching in high schools at the time when they were combining history and English programs so that students were spreading out in terms of how they thought about items. history wasn't just one self-contained subject, but you also looked at it in terms of the American literature that was produced and the kinds of reports that we asked students to do at the junior high level, at the high school level. I think that is much different than the European system. It's very, very content-based. You're going to know this particular set of facts and figures and numbers and have all of this content, where today in the US system, from friends that I have that are still involved, I actually visited on Monday the high school I taught 40 years ago. It is much more aligned with analysis. Here's the information, now what do you do with it? And I think on that factor, we're ahead. Is that going to help us? I don't know.
You help the Democrats.
The whole issue of critical race theory. So
Yeah, this whole movement toward more interdisciplinary education in the US, and I think the US education system is well known for adopting, latest trends because it's so linked to the tertiary education in the United States. And definitely the movement is toward more interdisciplinary education and more focus on the skills that you need to face unknown problems in a future that you can't even predict and that sort of thing. And that makes the whole idea of legislating that teachers can't teach critical race theory, whatever that means, more dangerous, because what it does basically is assumes, first of all, that there's content that's being taught, that students are just reading, memorizing, being tested on, and that, teachers are not, especially history, humanities teachers, are not using all of these different kinds of interdisciplinary strategies to promote questioning, to promote critical thinking, to promote problem solving, to looking at primary source documents, secondary source documents, evaluating those things. And, basically this whole approach from the 1619 Project and critical race theory, which isn't even something that you would teach in a K through 12 school. It's a theoretical framework for graduate students. It makes assumptions about teaching and teaching strategies that are really dangerous, especially for teachers who might think, well, now I can't present this, we can't read this work of literature because it talks about racism. We can't look at this set of documents because they refer to I don't know, something that has to do with a Native American massacre or something like that. And it's just really distorting, history, particularly history teaching, but also literature, in ways that are going to be really, I think, harmful.
It always has.
I can't hear you, Judy.
Sorry? Well, I'm on.
Get closer to a microphone.
Every educational system in history has had exactly the same thing. You're teaching the children the things that our generation knows, and the next generation isn't going to be like that. It's not, the things are not going to apply. And it's only in very, very stable situations that can work. Hello, what's this? Oh, the microphone. Sorry.
Yeah, but that's a lesson in itself, is it not? That if you can get the message through to school students at all levels, gradually, that, what's true today was maybe a sin 50 years ago. It was illegal 100 years ago, and that times change, and that what we're always striving for is something that everybody can use and can apply in their lives to make it comfortable for the greater society. I mean, there's not very well stated, but the idea of continual change should be part of our history lesson. that we've changed our attitudes according to the times. Like, oh, you know, Thomas Jefferson, a man of his times who owned slaves and wrote one of the great democratizing instruments of all time, in the Declaration. It's a lesson that I guess, isn't at the top of the curriculum, or maybe it is.
Shall we look at the next slide and about what is at the top of the agenda for conservatives in education?
The pillars, these are the pillars that are underlying the conservative educational policy agenda. And actually, it was a lot easier to identify these than it was to kind of piece together what the liberals think, but we'll talk about that afterwards. Conservatives believe in personal responsibility, limited government, free markets, individual liberty, traditional American values, and a strong national defense. The role of the government should be to provide people the freedom necessary to pursue their own goals. Conservative policies generally emphasize empowerment of the individual to solve problems. School vouchers create competition and therefore encourage schools to improve performance. Vouchers will give all parents the right to choose good schools for their children, not just those who can afford private schools. The phrase separation of church and state is not in the Constitution. The First Amendment to the Constitution states Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. This prevents the government from establishing a national church or denomination. However, it does not prohibit God from being acknowledged in schools and government buildings. Government should not interfere with religion and religious freedom. And Lee, you're going to do the next ones, okay? Because we're going to take turns here. Okay, so you do the next two. Go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, wait, let
I
me,
mean, do we want to take a look at the liberal and then maybe we can contrast them a little bit?
is it coming up on your
Okay.
screen?
Yep, it's there. Liberals believe in government action to achieve equal opportunity and equality for all. It is the duty of the government to alleviate school ills and to protect civil liberties, individuals, and human rights. Liberals believe the role of the government should be to guarantee that no one is in need. Liberal policies generally emphasize the need for the government to solve problems. Public schools are the best way to educate students. Vouchers take money away from public schools. Government should focus additional funds on existing public schools, raising teacher salaries and reducing class size. They support government efforts to promote diversity, equality, and inclusion. They support the separation of church and state. The Bill of Rights implies a separation of church and state. Religious expression has no place in government, public, i.e. public schools. The two should be completely separate. Government should not support religious expression in any way. All reference to God in public and government spaces should be removed.
A little harsh.
Yeah.
That's sort of
I'm sure there's some who would.
You sure what?
I'm sure there are some who would want all reference to God in public and government spaces be removed. From the money, from the mottos, in God we trust, from the God bless America at the end of every president's speech. It's a little bit hard. And what would that say? I mean, do liberals really want all reference to God in public and government spaces removed? It sounds to me like a conservative meme.
In education, specifically.
But is it more? I mean, I guess this is what it states, but it seems to me that that we're talking about specific religions when it really comes right down to it, because the conservative position, from what I can gather, is really very oriented towards Christianity. And this reference to God in public and government spaces has often been that we shouldn't be promoting Christianity. At the very least, we should be looking at all different types of religions. And maybe
Well-
that's okay.
Well, I mean, we are a Christian nation. We were founded as a Christian nation, were we not?
Except that
Ooh,
Jefferson was going
that's-
to take his oath of office on the Quran.
I mean, you know, I think this is a really interesting discussion, and I'm not sure it goes in the direction of education, and I know that it's also alive here in Greece. I mean, if a country is founded and their culture is based on a particular religion, just because you become a more international society, a melting pot like in America, does it mean that you have to abandon your identity as a Christian nation? And this is coming from someone where I have no real Christian identity. I'm just saying, at what point do we have to share the national narrative with newcomers and
Sarah Jane,
accommodate?
I'm going to take you a step back, though. I do not think that we were founded as a Christian nation. I believe we were a nation founded for religious freedom, right?
There you go.
That's our ancestors from
That's
the
the key.
Mayflower.
That's the
right?
key.
It was based
Yeah.
on
Part of
religious
us.
freedom, the choice to believe and have faith as you choose. And I think that's one of the things that our leaders have forgotten, because we're not all Christians. We're not all believers, but we do have the right to choose. That's the basis of our democracy.
Mhm. Yeah, I
And maybe
agree.
it's the values that we
Mhm.
need to focus on, not so much the religion itself. You know, were we founded on certain values? And Stacy, you're pointing out one of those values was freedom of religion.
Right. So
Maybe some of the other values are how we treat people, which may be part of Christianity, but
Mhm.
probably has a wider, you know, it's a general value. It's not just
And
a
that's the
Christian value.
Republican saying, you know, well, we're better as Christians because we don't impose Shira law, right? We're not going to cut off somebody's hand because, you know, they've stolen something. So
We used
automatically
to.
they assume that they're superior because, you know, they're not following some barbaric right. And yet our whole point of this nation, it began for religious freedom. And
No, it didn't. Stacy,
Well,
they
Stacy,
only left East
okay,
Anglia for
so-
religious freedom to practice their own thing. And then once they established the colonies in the Northeast, they didn't allow other people to have their religion there.
right,
They
I think,
replanted.
look
I
at
think
Native Americans. They were
Stacey-
pushed out.
Stacey, when I talk about how far do we share, I mean, if we have a freedom of religion in the sense that you are speaking about, then would we also allow people practicing another religion to have a parallel justice system? I mean, what I'm wondering is, I mean, how far are we willing to go in this idea of sharing our country's religious identity? I understand that everyone is free to practice as they wish, but I think the truth is that the laws are written and will continue to be written according to our Christian identity.
Our early leadership set up the norm based on that.
Yes.
That's not, though, what the Constitution, I mean, the Constitution clearly says that there shall be no establishment of an official religion. And when we're talking, if we want to bring this discussion back to education, I think, you know, in terms of public education, the debate could be at the local level about things like prayer in school, And generally those things are pretty easily regulated at the local level. You know, there are communities where nobody objects to prayer in school, so everybody prays in school. And there are other communities where it's just not done because there's, you know, maybe more diversity of, you know, religious
Vast variety of
faith
communities.
and so on.
Cool.
And then there are also, you know, religious schools and people who want a greater degree of religious education for their kids can send them to parochial schools, to evangelical schools. They can homeschool them. There's a whole
Okay.
plethora of homeschooling around particular Christian sects and things that I know people who are involved with, you know, in terms of homeschooling. But as far as public education is concerned, I think it's pretty clear that, you know, that there can't be any kind of established, you know, presence of any particular religious, there's no religion taught in school, except in terms of,
Religious
you know,
history, right?
humanities classes. You know, they might read literature, they might, you know, it's world history basically, which involves the social, the political, and the economic history of a country, which includes religion.
World religions.
Right.
Excuse me, I gotta
Um,
break in here because there's a whole naivete going on about this. Prayer in the schools and public schools having Bible study classes, which they had when I started to elementary school, was outlawed by a Supreme Court decision that had to do with families, and I believe they were Seventh-day Adventists, who did not want their children in the other Christian Bible study classes. There were 2 Jewish kids in my class who they had the option to go outside and do something else when the Bible study teacher was there. But the basis of the Supreme Court decision was that marginalized children who didn't fit into this mainstream and made them feel other and made other kids treat them as other. And therefore it was struck down. Okay, that's one thing. Now you can go to a parochial school. You can send your kids to the evangelical school or to the Catholic school. Catholic parents have been arguing about this for as long as I can remember, since I was a kid, because they pay taxes. Those taxes support the public schools. They have not had in the past up until, and I'm not really sure now what's going on, vouchers that they could take from the public coffer and pay for the tuition at the parochial schools. And that was an issue for them. But then it's
and
also,
it still is.
okay, and that's where the crack in the sidewalk starts, that goes toward charter schools and vouchers taking out of the public system for charter schools. So what we're talking about here is like really grand ideas. And you know, I'll go back to, I don't think we were founded on Christian principles. Just a few people thought they were, but they were also slave owners, some of them. So, you know, what principles did we really found the government on? But this idea of the establishment of religion was definitely important. But what we're talking about now, though, is who pays for it, who gets the money, and who continues to get the education. And
Karen, can I ask you, have you ever looked at the rise of the small religious parochial schools, if it were somehow correlated with that Supreme Court decision?
I think that happened later. Jan might have more.
Yeah, I'm not familiar either, but parochial schools have been around, Catholic schools particularly have been around in the United States for many years. I don't really know how many. I think there's been a more recent rise in schools that are more evangelical, and that sort of thing. One thing that I did just want to kind of bring the discussion back to, comparing these liberal and conservative policies. One of the two of the differences that we see are the role of government in public education, whereas the liberals think that it's the government's responsibility to solve problems. Conservatives tend to think that that should be left to individuals, groups of individuals, very much at the local level. And they don't, and how the government spends money on education, and this alludes to what Karen was talking about as far as vouchers are concerned, and that I think will segue us to, what some of the wedge issues are. How should the government spend money, the federal government particularly, spend money on education? At the state and local levels, it's more clearly defined along, like property taxes, and that creates the kinds of inequities that we see in school districts that have very low, levels of property taxes versus those that have are more affluent neighborhoods, have more businesses and so on that pay taxes and that kind of thing. So, in addition to the differing beliefs as far as separation of church and state, and whatever kinds of religious practices a particular local school will tolerate, from the conservative standpoint, these other differences between who actually is responsible for education and funding education and so on. Though that's a pretty big difference, I think, between the liberal and the conservative policies, and that's where the wedge issues come from. And maybe we should, I don't know how we're doing
Janet,
for time, but probably
Can
a good
I
idea to go
interject?
in.
Can I interject
Sure.
something? I mean, with regard to CRT, it was the
Mhm.
conservatives who were actually writing legislation, and Trump himself was supporting withholding federal funds from schools
Right.
that were teaching it. So it's interesting that they don't want the federal government involved until they want them involved. And it did
Right.
involve
It goes
funding.
beyond that. It goes beyond that, Sarah Jane. The phrase that Janet used on the first card about conservatives, choice in education. But then there's, freedom of choice, which is an abortion issue, which they don't want individual choice in abortion. They want individual choice in the wedge issues they bring up. So it's right down the line. And if you look at the state not telling the school teachers and the parents what will be taught in your schools, the state, the Kratos state, then you have to look at Texas and what they've done with curriculum and course books, their textbooks in Texas. I mean, that's been an issue now for 10, 15
Many
years.
years.
It's
Yeah.
like, white man speak with forked tongue.
Yeah. And on the one hand, there's all this talk about cancel culture, and on the other hand, there's all this censorship going on around literature. It was banned book week. I don't know if you guys saw that, but all these books that have been banned for use in schools that are great works of literature. And it's like, who should decide that? And the conservatives often
Who is
think we
banning
should.
this book? Janet, who is behind the banned book week? Is that at the federal? I mean, this is local?
No, it's local. It's definitely local. And it's in those same states that are on a thing about critical race theory, and and even at universities, I've read that they haven't banned books, but students refuse to read books because they say, oh, that disagrees with my fundamental principles, or that triggers something in my, they haven't read it, so I don't know how they
Book.
Pardon?
How do they know that if they haven't read the book?
Well, that's a very, very legitimate question, Stacy.
I mean, let's, back to critical thinking. You can't just read a book cover and decide. You actually have to read the book.
Yeah. But no, I'm too sensitive.
Yeah, but we started it too. What about Tipper Gore and the Senate wives? They were
Right,
banning
right.
books and music and rock bands and,
Yeah,
police
yeah.
and God knows
Putting,
who else.
well, they didn't ban them. They put parental warnings on them.
Parental warnings. Well, that's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah.
mean, parental
And
warnings-
you know, the R-rated cinema and all
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So
Let's
Lee,
quickly run down this list. It's a long one. Clearly, there are a lot of wedge issues which make it difficult for the liberal agenda and the conservative agenda to sort of see eye to eye. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice and critical race theory. These are all sort of intertwined and related, and they're the hot topic for right now, I would say. Religious freedom, we talked about. Parental choice and charter schools. We know that that's something that the conservative support.
Really? Why? Okay. Hit the wrong button, eh?
yeah. Timed us out.
Okay, so corporate involvement in education, this has a lot to do with the curriculum. Teacher unions, the conservative right doesn't like teachers unions at all. They want to get rid of them. They feel like they're not useful. Then it gets back into the role of government. Where should government be putting their money, and how much influence should they have? Free speech on the university college campuses. This is something where the conservatives feel like that the liberals have taken over the campuses and therefore they don't have the right to have free speech. And then I had mentioned critical race theory. So do we want to continue with our, each a little bit of our thinking based on the articles that we've read? We don't have too much time, I think, right? Because we do want to spend a little time going through things. No, I'm going to blank. What things we can do about this as Democrats abroad, as Democrats in the United States, and what are some of the issues that can bring this whole thing together and perhaps make it work? So Jan, do you want to start, or should I start, or what?
Why don't you start and then I'll follow, and or other people can jump in.
I think we do have to try to keep it short so that we can have time to sort of flush through the other things. But one of the things that we were going to say about each of ourselves when we were thinking that we would introduce ourselves is where we vote in. And I vote in New Jersey, and I was information from the county courthouse that said that in New Jersey, if you're not intending to return, you cannot vote in local and state elections. So this is something that I would want to put on the list of things that we perhaps could do, which is to make people aware of what their state restrictions are. Because in some ways it makes sense, but when I did some thinking about it, I realized that what we're seeing now is that so many issues are local and they also affect the federal level. I guess the most obvious one is voting rights, but even perhaps education. So I think that this is something that we all need to be much more aware of. I might be sort of disingenuous, but I think next year I'm going to write that I intend